So we're going to start off today with a really fun talk about carbon markets. And we are trying to do something different, but we need to learn from the experienced experts who've done things about this in the past. And we're really, really lucky to have amazing guests here to talk about this. So I'm going to ask our moderator to come up and our speakers, Ross Kenyon, co-founder of Nori, Aldyen Donnelly, Josh Margolis. There you go.
How should we, or we just gonna pass this?
Yes, it's so good.
I'm in the middle here, it appears. Move the. Like you mean on the stage? Like.
Because we have the podium there. Good?
So I am Ross Kenyon. I'm the lead growth strategist with Nori. I co-host the podcast, worked quite hard on the white paper, which I hope you had a chance to take a look at before you came. If not, I'm sure you'll have a good crash course in it just by being here. Interactivity is encouraged. We designed this so that it wasn't just people lecturing at you. We very much value your feedback. It's why you're here. We are okay with criticism. We recognize that some of the design choices we've made are not necessarily ones that have existed before. So that's part of the fun and what's exciting about this to us. So please feel free to speak your mind. I'll start this off by generally giving us a baseline on the topic, and then we'll open it up if you have comments. So we'd like this to be quite participatory, and I intend to keep it as such. So, Josh Margolis, you're a bit of a legend in this space. 35 plus years involved. Pretty much every time I've spoken to someone about carbon markets, they've asked me if I've known you or if we're affiliated with you. You have so much to say about this topic, and we're very honored that you are here. You also told me a term that you prefer for your professional designation. Was it carbon market practitioner?
Environmental markets.
Environmental markets practitioner. So that's great. A number of financial innovations, some of which are patented, that you have developed. So we're very happy that you are here. Aldyen Donnelly has been involved in this space since the early 90s. Is that right? They met in '89, so this is a long-running affiliation, friendship. Yeah, pretty much as long as this process has been going on, or very, very nearly. And you orchestrated one of the biggest forward contract purchases of credits in the very early days. In fact, it was the biggest at the time, was it not? Yes. So I wanted to start off by defining what a carbon market is. And I think there's probably no one better to do this than you, Josh. Could you explain to us the difference between a voluntary and a compliance market and where we are?
Thanks, Ross. Great to see you, Aldyen. It's been a little while. But let me cycle back to the description. It's a great compliment to say that I'm a legend, but legends are something you read about, and they're often, they're dead. I'm still writing a story, right? So let me carry on. I think there's more to be done for sure. In my experiences is that carbon markets are drawn from the environmental markets. Carbon markets are a construct of what we've decided to talk about. And I think we're better off as practitioners in this space in thinking about markets that serve those who are buyers and sellers. If I'm in what you're calling carbon market, I happen to walk in the same room and we happen to be in the same place. There's this Venn diagram, right? You think I'm buying carbon, but what I'm really after is value. Is value that I can use to make my life better, to make my constituents better, to deliver value, co-benefits to my community. Carbon sure may be a part of it, right? But it's if you talk about carbon, I'm going to pull back and say I'm really after value that is environmental, value that's economic, value that's about energy, about NOx and SOx and particulates and VOCs, about ecosystems, about sustainable agriculture. To your question, voluntary versus mandatory. We got initially on the path to talking about carbon credits, carbon reductions, carbon sequestration, carbon mitigation in the voluntary context because there was no requirement. When Aldyen and I started to kibitz, and before that, there was an aspiration to have a global cap on carbon, but there was none in existence at that point. But there were sustainably focused companies, individuals, policymakers, who said, you know what, I think that this is something that we should internalize. We should talk about the carbon that's being released, and we should figure out the costs of that and move forward with a discussion that says, how can we internalize those costs, assign values to them, but also to the benefits, because we can't solve problems simply by beating people on the heads. We have to show them why their lives are going to be better off, and that's what you're doing when you're engaging in a transaction. You should buy this product because your life will be better off and if you don't buy it, your life will not have certain attributes. So it was a voluntary market because there was no government requirement, right? Now, over time, as we have labored in the trenches, the government has moved forward with, thanks to innovative legislators, policymakers, stakeholders, encouraged by the public, by folks who have something to gain or lose with the current policy construct, encouraged by them to say, you know what, if you don't, as the government, you don't serve your role as a director, as somebody who says these are our policy goals and they are important to us as a society, then we will be poorer as a group. Therefore, there will be a carbon limitation, and those who are contributing to the problem will be involved in the solution. And the government is going to be most effective if it's in a position to say, you know what, yeah, you do have a responsibility and a challenge to face. If you do it well, you're going to turn this carbon problem, this carbon waste stream, into a profit stream. So with caps that governments imposed, first they were energy intensity caps, and then they became carbon absolute caps, and then we're in the process of evolving, both here in the US with the RGGI program in California, and then in the EU ETS, and then also with the 7 Chinese pilots, now 9 moving into the National Cap and Trade Program. We now have a recognition that carbon is a constraint that needs to be managed, and that there's a consequence to not doing so. And that consequence has to do as much about penalties as it does with benefits. So voluntary would be nice to have. Mandatory, you got to do it. And we're the government, and we're here to make sure that happens.
Great, thank you so much, Josh. Wanted to ask, who here has participated in a voluntary carbon market? Could you please raise your hand if so? Great. Leave your hand up if you were a buyer. All right. Put your hand up if you were a seller. Yeah, sellers are less common. Interesting. Okay, thank you. What about the same for compliance markets? Has anyone participated in those? Leave your hand up if you work at a utility. Okay. Interesting. I have a good sense of the crowd now. I see. See what's going on. Sure.
And same sort of survey. Can you put your hand up if you've participated in a carbon market and been happy with the experience? Great. Okay, so there are some guideposts and some points to refer to and say these are shining stars. And then how about hands up if you've been in a carbon market and made money at it? Covered that, not just paying, not receiving revenues, but made a profit. Good. Okay. All right. And how many hope to be in a carbon market that's effective and that's profitable for you?
Put your hands up. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, I wanted to get to opening this up as quickly as possible because we would love to hear feedback from people about their experiences in the carbon markets, what they think could be improved, what were pain points for them. We're miking up, it appears. Would quite like to ask you, Josh, as someone who has... I will hold for one moment. I'll just hang on to this.
I'll give you one.
I can just... Oh, you need the mic. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. And then, Josh, I'd be quite interested in how you feel. What are some of the design choices that that you've made that maybe you think could be improved upon? What do you think Nori should not lose sight of in light of all the work that you've done on this topic? And
Sorry, guys.
you're watching me multitask here.
I studied with Klaus in environmental engineering, not event planning. I forgot the mics.
And then maybe before we totally open it up, Aldyen, I would love to hear about your experience, both from the very beginning to up to the present, interacting with carbon markets. How would you describe them?
Changing all the time.
Yeah.
I actually met Josh the first time in 1989 when a mutual friend, Eric Hadi, put together a team in Canada, I'm Canadian, to look at existing and planned cap and trade markets in the US. That time we were looking at criteria pollutants to see if the model might be one that we should import into Canada. So just to put Josh in context, by 1989, Josh was already one of the leading active participants in the US emissions trading markets for 5 years. He and his partner, John Palmisano, created the very first ever emissions trading company. And I don't think there's a human being who has directly participated in the design of more emission markets than Josh. He's everywhere. His prints on everything. As a result of that one project, I certainly formed the opinion that cap and trade was the way forward, that we might start with voluntary markets, but it was going to have to lead to government type of goal setting. And I was terrified because I was a Canadian and we in Canada had no experience with that kind of market or that kind of mechanism. So a few years later, I was able to bring together a consortium of 14 of then Canada's 20 largest emitters. And I know it's going to sound kind of weird, but we all agreed to really pretend hard that last Friday our government had legislated an obligation on the companies to absolutely reduce emissions. And that if we could prove that other projects were reducing emissions or removing carbon from the atmosphere, we could incorporate credits from those other projects in our compliance strategy. And then they actually paid me to go out and put projects together. So the whole idea wasn't to form a consensus in the industry that cap and trade was the right mechanism. It was to catch Canadians up to where we thought Americans were. So take it seriously, experience doing real deals, and have the experience of doing the real deals inform your corporate positions on the mechanism and how it should work. We planned to do it for 2 years. We hadn't planned on being big. I only did one-off projects, so any project I did was a first of. I tried to make sure that if the companies liked it, they could, independent of me and each other, go and replicate the contracting. But by 2002, I actually didn't do the count, but the IETA said I held the largest forward portfolio of emission reduction credits in the world. And by 2003, unfortunately, it became apparent to me things had emerged. The European trading regime was in its design phase. There were a lot of conversations in the United States. RGGI meetings were happening weekly, and the Chicago Climate Exchange had been established. And the short version of a long story is all of the formal markets that were emerging were markets that were designed in a way that totally surprised us. Totally surprised us. They were markets in which only credits trade, there were no balancing debits. So certificates were created that purported to represent reductions in inventories. But if I sold you a real interest in a -1 in my inventory, you get to import the -1 into your inventory, but I don't have to add a +1 to mine. So when we had done our original contracts, doing our deals, we were very commercial in orientation. So we assumed there would be double entry bookkeeping, and if a certificate represented a change in an inventory, you would account for your inventory differently. So when we bought emission reductions from a gas processing plant, our contract obliged the plant operator to report to the US EPA their emissions at the level they would have been had they not sold real interest in -1 to us, because we never imagined you wouldn't have double entry bookkeeping in the biggest, newest market in the world. The net result of that is I got permission to flip my 50 million ton portfolio, and we did so at a small profit. And we got out of the market, and the companies that I was working with moved to an alternative strategy to manage their greenhouse gas risk. And they did some amazing things.
They eventually just surrendered. They said that was a big part of it.
I wouldn't say that. Probably they didn't sign up if they didn't think this was a real issue.
Mm-hmm.
But it's easy to, I don't talk sustainable development. It's easy to go to a board and say, you know, if you think there's only a 10% probability that you're going to have to reduce your operating emissions by 20% 10 years from now, and it's only going to cost $20, you got 15% of your share value at risk. Do you want to deal with that before the bond raters do or after? So I don't think they thought of it as voluntary. They thought of it as protecting share value at risk, and I wish we could communicate more of that. But I want to come to why Nori. Moved on to do different things. But there's a simple reality. There are only two ways to reduce atmospheric carbon. One is to remove it from the atmosphere, and one is to retain in the Earth's reserves, terrestrial, aquatic built structures, carbon that otherwise would have been lost. One of the things that happened in every market, voluntary and compulsory, is that when we built our markets, we decided to build these markets that have apples and oranges in them. So yes, I believe removal is the essential activity we've got to move forward for reasons that others have already spoken about. But we had this other problem. In all of those markets, if you're a grower and you have the capacity to remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it, all of the market administrators, voluntary or compulsory, say you must prove that you increase the carbon stock held in the soil, and you must covenant to retain it in the soil permanently. But if I own a power plant, if I reduce my emissions, even temporarily for this year, even if it can be proved that the coal I didn't burn was not retained, I created a permanent emission reduction credit. So the underlying value of what we're calling a carbon removal certificate in every market that has a face value of 1 ton is pretty much 1 ton. Plus, you've got a landowner who said, I've promised to keep it in my warehouse for 80 years. Over here, you can't prove that 1 ton was retained, let alone was going to be retained permanently. And this guy is being forced to compete with this guy in the market. And this guy's certificates are always going to go for cheaper because the underlying value of the certificate isn't 1 ton. I'm involved in Nori because rather than try to fix markets that are trading certificates, the underlying value of which range from 0 to 1 ton plus or minus 10%, I want us to create the first market. We will create, with your help, the first market where our certificates that say 1 ton are worth 1 ton. What happens when you get there? I'll just give you a little sense of reference numbers. The United States of America budget just agreed that the taxpayers will subsidize investment in carbon capture and storage at gas-fired power plants. Taxpayers will put up $35 to $50 a ton CO2 equivalent. And the stated goal of the policy, which I'm not opposing, I'm just saying this is reference number, is to get the cost of reducing CO2 emissions at the power plants while we're still planning on exporting the coal that we're not burning in those power plants, from $70 a ton down to $35. So we're talking about committing the American taxpayers and ratepayers in combination to a long-term strategy that's going to cost $80 a ton. I can assure you, I can't assure you, SEC, if you're in the room, all disclaimers. So you got that part? A market price of $17 to $35 a ton, US farmers can offset 100% of all of the US's natural gas-fired power plant emissions. Why the hell would you go forward with a strategy that's going to end up being passed through to farmers with an electricity rate increase to 21 cents a kilowatt hour, when you could actually be offsetting all of those emissions, making your farmers more profitable at less than half the price? Hopefully, Nori's creating a platform where everybody can see how easy it is to get this right.
That's great. Thank you, Aldyen. I share this vision. I hope that is so. Josh, I'm sure you would like to respond and add things to it. Would you like to? I'm sure. I'd like to open it up, but I'll give you a chance to, if you want to respond a little bit to
Josh
Aldyen.
and I have been banging heads for a long time. We're friends. It doesn't matter what happens next.
One of the reasons, Aldyen, that we're banging heads is because way back when, in the legendary times, more and more I feel like I'm in that Monty Python character where they're saying, "Bring out your dead, bring out your dead." The guy says, "I'm not dead yet," you know. So is that you haven't hit me over the head yet, in that we're trying to engage with each other in a way that's going to both serve the common interests as well as our own. And our own interests are enlightened by the idea that we have an objective, which is to deliver a solution. I mean, oftentimes, look, I think in graphics, and let me, for the sake of this discussion, give you a graphic which will give you a context for where we are, where we're going to go, and then why I think it's imperative that Nori succeed. I mean, think of me in the context of my height as being the global emissions, 36 billion tons. And then here would be where business as usual emissions would put us, right? And yet the scientists tell us that we need to not just halve our emissions, but we need to bring them down, right? Right. And we need to be happy about it, right? Right. So it's true. We have to be successful, and I want Nori to succeed. And part of what Nori is all about is distinguishing the quality of product, the quality of carbon credits. But I think you'd agree that this is the discussion that goes beyond a transaction, beyond which ledger the credit's in. And it has to go to engagements with policymakers who, frankly, are representing the people who elected them. But they don't have constituents in the room that are going to benefit or suffer from the consequences of their actions. Our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, they're not here. So there's nothing more important in my mind in terms of where we need to go, in terms of the challenges that face us, than solving this problem, which for the sake of this discussion we're calling carbon, but it's much more than just carbon. So I hope that I continue to help you write the story. I look forward to the next transaction that we'll do. It's been too long since the last one.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? And I've got to figure out how I can get you back into the marketplace, because every time you do a deal, the earth benefits.
Thank you.
Alden, you didn't tell me he was going to be so theatrical.
I knew that.
No one
It
prepped me
was
for
a
that.
sure thing.
Hey, Ross, we've got a couple questions
Great,
from the
let's-
audience.
Let's do it.
So I'm gonna pass around. Let me explain how this works. So you guys have name tags, and if you stand them up on their side, like Sean has right here, then I know that you have a question, and then I can come. Raising your hand works too, but you might get tired. So, Sean.
I want to ask about the market oversupply that I read about in the white paper. Do you think it's always because of the political process, like having the regulatory capture and the interest to get government giving them a large amount in the early years? And why don't they just decline the cap faster? Because like the whole point is to reduce the cap, so they could just like adjust that, but it seems that's not really occurring.
Can I try and answer? I was saying at the table before, it's way harder to change the behavior of good people who are doing the wrong things for all the right reasons than getting at a bad guy. When you actually, and Josh has done this more than me, so I'm just introducing my thought. Whether you're talking SO2, NOx, or CO2, think about it. When you actually go to cap a corporation's entitlement to emit, you're expropriating asset value. And you might theoretically approach the process with an idea that we're going to cap and we're going to be more stringent. But among other things, in 40 states, if those companies can prove you've expropriated asset value, they have to be compensated. So if you go back historically to the people, to people who were really trying to do this right, it's rational that you start with an excess of allowances and move down so that over time you're providing a windfall that's offsetting the asset devaluation that you're causing by the regulation. So the reason it always starts that way makes a lot of sense. But for every cap and trade regime that has been, I have examined in detail 44. There might be some I missed. But for all 44, no, for 43 of 44, the one exception being one that he largely designed, reclaim.
Not quite.
Well, we can debate that. The political will goes sideways when you get to there. So the initial design's not wrong. It's the political will goes sideways for a bunch of reasons that everybody can well imagine. Now, what happens, and why should major industry be more on my team than they are? Because what happens in every precedent? You get regulated up the wazoo. So cap and trade ends up being maybe a 5 to 7 year delay in regulation, then you get hit with regulation. There is no precedent in which in cap and trade has actually replaced regulation Sometimes it's delayed it just for a short time. Everybody who's in the California Cap and Trade, take my word for it, program right now, will be in full compliance with by 2020 and find themselves subject to a whole bunch of incremental regulation because the environmental objectives won't have been achieved. I think it's time to move on to a different model. Same idea of trading credits, the positive, the amount removed, the amount retained. But cap and trade is, this would make sense to a Canadian audience, not so much in America, is good old-fashioned quota-based supply management, just like the dairy quota regime your negotiators are trying to get Canada to wipe out as soon as possible. And good old-fashioned quota-based supply management always turns into trade protectionism or sectoral industry protectionism in every application, in every sector. And I only sort of advocated for cap and trade for 20 years before I figured that out. So if you guys all figure out in 5 years, you're like 4 times smarter than me.
Oh, that's great. Loud. You want to get to another question? I can see you over there maneuvering. But wait, Josh, let's just try to keep the responses a little bit shorter so we can get to more questions. It's okay. But I'm sure you'd like to say something too.
Well, real quickly, Aldyen, I very much appreciate the accolades, but I'm a stakeholder. I haven't been a policymaker. So I've engaged in these markets, and I got engaged in them, though I'm an environmental markets practitioner, because I realized that well-designed markets are that way because they serve the needs of the participants, buyers, sellers, the public, right? Totally agree with you in terms of the importance of starting a system. The Big Bang is the challenge. It's a bit like, if you said, I think all of us, well, I'll speak for myself, maybe a number of us would like to be in better shape. I feel like I should do things that I'm not doing, in terms of running out, and working out. But if you told me that I had to, right now, sign on the dotted line to commit to, to run 3 miles a day, to do my aerobics, and to eat gluten-free, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I wouldn't sign the dotted line. So if you said instead, would you like to feel better be more energetic and find yourself in a better state of mind in the morning, all you have to do is sign here and we'll gradually move you into the program, then I'm more likely to sign on. The allocation process is the most challenging. If you look at RGGI, if you look at the California, the AB 32, the California Cap and Trade Program, these programs evolve over time. The EU ETS, it evolves over time. The cap will gradually go down as the prices go down.
Great. Alessandra, let's, there we go.
Hey, there's a weird theme of mortality here, Josh, and despite all your protestations, you're memorialized on the board in a prone position. Just want to point that out. Okay. Hi, good morning. Quick question. I work for a large flooring manufacturer. We were a buyer and are a buyer in the voluntary carbon market, and as this conversation escalates, what's the advice from the two of you on what we can do to accelerate this conversation as a buyer? And also make sure that the things that are really important to us, like verification, credibility, ease of transfer, get respected and built in as this is being built. So advice to me as a buyer.
Great question. Let me, there was also, I'd like to add a footnote to the introductory discussion. We were talking earlier about, imagine a world where when you take a ride with Lyft or Uber, you have an opportunity to offset your carbon. The future is here. Lyft is doing this now. Full disclosure, my daughter works for Lyft, all right? But 10 million rides a week, and that's a challenge to Uber. One of the reasons why I think Lyft is doing this is that they believe, A, that it's in the interest of the world that they live in, B, their customers want it. The customers are looking for a reason to say, which one should I choose? Uber, Lyft, Uber, Lyft. Well, I've just been given another reason to choose Lyft. Right? And this is going to affect my decision. I may be even willing to pay a little bit more Another reason that I might choose Lyft is that it gives me the opportunity to donate to a charity of choice. If you're thinking about a company that has an opportunity to spend shareholder monies on carbon, I think you have to think sustainability in the context of your balance sheet. Do your customers want it? Will you get more customers? Will your customers be more loyal if they see you taking these steps? Can you be a leader, as California has been with other nations in the world in terms of exporting their ideas? Right? So California can do it. You as a company can do it. How will this serve your customers and your shareholders?
I would say a few things, and unfortunately, the first thing is still a little bit hard to do, but I'm very hung up on if the certificate says 1 ton on the face, it's worth 1 ton. And I would ask all serious buyers to think about that really hard, because right now, most of us are exchanging $1 US for a piece of monopoly money. You know, those markets that are peddling you monopoly money, they'll actually substitute real money if the buyers compel them to. So I'm arguing Nori is going to create that certificate, the underlying value for which matches the face value. Hopefully the result of that is everybody else is going to start doing that, not just on Nori, and buyers can get ahead of us on that game. The other thing that I'll sort of say generally is I love all of the buyers to start thinking of yourselves not just as buyers, but as retailers that might accept Nori tokens as partial payment. So let's get the token that this blockchain has created right into retail as fast as possible. So if you sell services and anything to farmers who are regenerative farmers, and you think it's in their best interest and your best interest for them to generate revenues from carbon removal certificates, which will trade for tokens, you willing to take some tokens in payment for the services you're selling the farmers? I mean, let's create a real market, a real, that everybody recognizes that's not theoretical as soon as possible. Suppliers to landowners can do it. Suppliers to the forest sector can do it. Retail food sellers can do it. Let's figure out a way to actually send that make sure that certificate that you click to get at Lyft has an underlying value of 1 ton, and let's get that retail presence of whatever the certificates are that are representing that 1 ton out there everywhere soon.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? I love that. So the buyers in the room, like we could buy carpets with Nori, we could buy cover seed. Keith, next to me. We have another question from Matt.
Hello. To the Nori team, thank you for making this happen. This is really awesome. We are creating we're making the existing system obsolete, right? That's what we're doing. I think that's pretty great to be sharing the space with everybody to do that. Aldyen, thank you for mentioning the inequality between the participation in carbon markets between fossil fuel industry and that kind of camp and agriculture. In addition to having in increasing the ability of the farms to verify their progress and their contribution, where is their momentum in the political space? Because it seems like, the people in the fossil fuel industry are very powerful in that space. Agriculture has a lot of money, but it seems like they might not have that much political power. So I'm wondering, I know about the Citizens Climate Lobby and the Climate Caucus. That's happening. Is there something else that's going on that's going to give the large, that's going to give big ag more power at the table to say, look, motherfucker, like, we're doing a really kick-ass job, and like, you don't get it, but we do.
Samuel L. Jackson, who's going in?
Yeah, you know.
I am so glad
Thank
to
you.
not be the only potty mouth in the room.
She's very aggressive, yes.
I would apologize and say we're just getting started at that. To be frank, I personally have been off the market for a while. But I think it's a matter of all of us in the room giving them the tools. So maybe I promise to write a concise version of the story of, do you want to have a greenhouse gas neutral American electricity sector at 22 cents a kilowatt hour, no revenues to landowners, or half that while making your landowners more profitable and productive food producers? That I think if that story, which is real, could get out and communicated concisely by everybody who understands it and to whom it matters, I think that could be a compelling argument that could grow into something very substantial very quickly. A little bit of history, most people don't remember that in 1997, when most of the nations of the world signed the Kyoto Protocol, in Japan in December 1997, the parties agreed that enhancements of soil carbon stocks in ag lands would not be counted towards progress to the Kyoto Protocol, which was very disappointing for me and my group, because we were in our third year of a 4-year research project to create the measurement protocols to commercialize soil carbon. And I ran to Washington, D.C. and Ottawa and said, okay, Canada and US, you were on the soil carbon isn't in camp. What do we need to do to change your mind? And I got told, $15, $20 million a year to the lobbyists, 3 to 5 years, you might get your way. So with the help of one of Josh's colleagues at Cantor Fitzgerald, we went to the Iowa Farm Bureau, put together a forward agreement to buy carbon credits from 137 farmers in Iowa, Indiana, and Illinois. And somehow the Iowa Farm Bureau got the US position on soil carbon changed within 9 months, and it cost us an option call premium of $625,000.
So we've got...
When you go home, you'll think of 18 versions of that each of you can figure out how to replay. I know you can.
We've got about 10 more minutes. I got 3 more questions I think I want to do.
So, I'm a bit of a newcomer to this topic, so pardon me if this is a bit of a basic question, but from your experience, what have been the greatest challenges with regards to systemic fraud and cheating these markets? And then what do you foresee that markets like Nori, which offer the chance to do these things at far greater scale and degrees of automation ever before, what are they going to do to make sure that we simply don't automate and scale fraud to a greater degree than before?
Me? Okay, me. First of all, anybody who says they know how to launch a totally 100% fraud-proof marketplace has no business experience whatsoever. Our shot at doing this right is really good. There are all of the aspects of blockchain and transparency that we will benefit from. We are working with the SEC. We're not fighting. We're working to be SEC compliant. In terms of carbon market type frauds, at the same time, our market will be much more efficient because of the blockchain platform, and more transparent because of the blockchain platform. We are going to require that the data fed into our system by sellers is going to be verified by a person in a position of fiduciary responsibility. So there will be verification by a human being as well, but much more efficient verification than is in traditional markets. combined with the efficiency of blockchain. Ideally, 5-6 years from now, we'll know how to remove the requirement for that human assurance element, but we're adding it in to start, and I think we're going to be in pretty good shape.
Wolf, you had a question? On your left.
Sure. Hi, thank you. I'm an assessor for ANSI, the American National Standards Institute. So I go off and I look at these projects and I actually audit the auditors in those cases.
We're going to have auditors like you too.
So my experience that these projects, they're not, I think you're taking experience from 2003 to kind of jade you on the view of kind of the markets today. And I admit that the CDM market is not as tight as either California or ANSI, who works up in Canada, who I do a lot of work in Canada. And the other thing that I'm noticing that I'm very attracted to on these projects is the meeting of sustainable development goals with carbon removal projects. I wonder if you can comment on those issues, topics. Thank you.
Can I just say, give you, say, 2 examples of existing markets?
Sure, we just try to keep these.
Yeah, I tend to stick in the weeds. In the California market, California includes emissions from upstream, outside California, power plants in the California state inventory. So each time a electricity import agreement is terminated, that shows up as a reduction in California's inventory. Even if the coal-fired power plant in New Mexico that used to export electricity to California continues to operate, if it shuts down, it shows up as a reduction in California's inventory and New Mexico's inventory. So best case scenario, each one of those reductions is double credited.
Well, that's a failure of policy in that circumstance. The overall, I think that of all the countries.
70% of the reductions in California's inventory since 2005 have been those double credited reductions. So if the allowance supply is reflective of the inventory that double counts the baseline, that allowance supply is in massive surplus. So I'm not sure that's not a 2003 example. And everything that's happening that has created that outcome is totally in compliance with all of the auditing standards.
Yeah, I'd like to see you two maybe discuss over coffee or something. I'm sure there's a lot to say, I'm sure. I want to ask Josh one more question too, so let's try to keep it a little brief.
My question might actually be for Josh. I'm interested in learning more about additionality tests, which are decidedly not a part of the Nori market design, and whether the need for them that people imagined in prior emissions reductions markets doesn't apply when you're talking specifically about carbon removal projects, or whether it might still be important, and who would think it's important, and who would be pushing for them.
A couple things. One is responsive to your question. Let me give you a broader framing statement, Aldyen, which is that I think that the solution that you're focused on, which is to make these products quality, is a laudable solution. To provide them with a barcode where you can say you can rely upon this because it meets these criteria. But if you want to sell more product, you have to cater. I would recommend that you cater to the customers. And the customers, if the customers want to see a specific kind of product, then it would behoove those of us in the room who want to deliver that product to say, okay, I fit this box, or this box, or this box, because when I'm buying a carbon project, yes, I care about whether or not it is a ton, whether or not it is additional, whether or not it meets the ANSI criteria or the California criteria, but I also care about some other things, especially in the voluntary world. So in terms of additionality, if the customer cares about additionality
and the customer has good reason to, then we're not in a position to tell the customer that he or she is wrong. You know, we should be able to say, if you want additional tons that meet these bullets, here they are, right? And here's the cost, and here are the co-benefits that go along with it. And the other is to, again, if I don't have a chance to say thank you, to thank you for the opportunity you provided me to engage in this discussion. I think that in looking at yesterday's markets, today's markets, this provides us with the mulch from which tomorrow's markets are going to arise.
He's a gracious guy.
Josh, I wanted to ask you, what perhaps is a feature of some of the carbon markets you've designed that you wanted to be a part of them, but were not able to, either from political will or just the technology wasn't there yet? And then if there's anything that we've missed that we should reconsider, given what you know about Nori, I'd love to hear that. I'm sure the rest of the people here would too.
Well, again, Russ, I'm a stakeholder. I worked for the government when I was an intern a long time ago, right? But in the meantime, I'm a practitioner, so I don't get to write the rules. I can recommend. I recommend, in the context of Nori, to be always thinking about how you can gain more value that you can then deliver to your customers. It's the blockchain idea, which I want to learn more about, seems to be a way to make these transactions, to remove some barriers. But a transaction is going to occur when a buyer finds a seller and the two of them are able to engage in a transaction that they didn't otherwise know they were going to do. And if you can make them, if you can improve the probability that that deal is going to happen, then you're going to realize your mission statement, and you're going to make all of those who invested in Nori happy that they did.
Beautiful. That's a good thing to leave us with. Is there anything else? Would you like to say?
That's it. Thank you so much. Can we thank our speakers?